Why are donuts called donuts? Why? Because the Soviet Union goes nuts over dough, and dough rhymes with snow. Well, anyways, I gotta start running for president. Hey there guys, Obscure Titan with another essay video for Megatronic Legacy. Previously, we covered Velvet Crow and her potential in the story. Now that we've got our vengeful friend out of the way, it's the Red Squirrel's turn. There will definitely be jokes, but replace the game's innuendos with anti-communist ones. We'll start with his most popular game in his series, Bad Fur Day. There is Diddy Kong Racing 12 Tales, which is a cancelled game, and a few others that featured him, but for the sake of this video, we'll only be using Bad Fur Day, and the version that I'm showing for gameplay footage is Live and Reload. I mean, it's the most affordable one, unless if you're going for reproduction copies, which I ended up avoiding, with the exception of Sega Saturn. With that being said, let's go nuts with Conker. It all starts with Conker going to a bar and partying out with his folks there. He eventually got drunk and tried getting back home. However, it didn't seem to be so. Meanwhile, the Panther King was enjoying his glass of milk until it broke by falling off the table. As it turns out, it lacks a fourth leg. It demands his minions to find a substitute for the construct. Otherwise, he got out the duct tape.
Not to worry.
Back on Conker, he partakes into various adventures which tend to range from rolling some shit to a mountain, to fighting a pitchfork, feeding a mouse, dancing at bars, fighting off what appears to be a National Socialist teddy bears and agents. One would assume at first glance that this Red Squirrel is family friendly. Conker would appear as if he's a good boy who would never drink alcohol, be generous, and courteous of his language. Well,
I'm gonna get tanked tonight.
Not exactly. As you can tell from the game, he's pretty much a bastard. He gets around. He's also sarcastic, making jokes which could also come off at the expense of others that he meets.
He's gone off, you know, with another woman.
Oh, really? That doesn't surprise me.
What? Nothing.
Beyond his jokes and otherwise smart aleck attitude, Conker will take on anything if he gets what he wants. He'd make a good Tarantino movie. Despite what his official lore suggests, I have some ideas to give to the Red Squirrel where his lineage came from and how his place in the Cold War could play out. I want to start off this by going off with the discussion of his parents. Taking place on the planet Metrospheris, there was a squirrel couple. For the sake of this video, we'll call them Jacker, the father, and Marianne, the mother. The planet consisted of various anthropomorphic creatures, ranging from humanoid beings called Prometheans to biomechanical machines to animals that can work, eat, and live like everybody else. The couple have spent their lives together and considered having a baby after they got married. However, by the end of 1947, one of the planet's syndicalist parties with Zerg and Zaktan on the island of Voyanui sent out troops to take properties from a part of Midgrandia Nui's southern continent. This forced the civilians to either flee to northern continents, a place where Velvet Crow would be born in, a video that I actually created so I would suggest checking it out, or find portals to immigrate to other planets. They chose the latter, because Zerg and Zaktan could potentially take over Midgrandia Nui. Jacker and Marianne would not take chances in which they would subjugate to them. The couple ended up going to America after World War II ended, and the Cold War was just starting out. In 1949, the couple have a baby and named him Connor Lux Squirrel. The name would seem ridiculous for even considering that name, but as you're going to see, this will eventually get us to the guy making a nickname. Throughout Conker's childhood in America, he spent his time in a school where beings from Metrospheris, at least the anthropomorphic ones, are being segregated to their own schools, until President Eisenhower would pass a law that would desegregate children of different ethnics so they can attend schools. This also includes the Metrospheris beings who immigrated to America. Conker ends up admiring Eisenhower and hopes to join the American government to fend off global tensions and keep its economy intact. As he's growing up in the 1960s, Conker noticed that tensions were rising. The civil rights movement, inflation started to take an effect on the economy at a very small minimum until later on, and many others that would take up more than the list. Conker goes to a university in which he studies to get into U.S. Congress and make his way into joining them. He graduates and becomes a member of the U.S. Congress in 1974. It was there that Conker ends up meeting Flan and Spyro for the first time. However, there's one other bit about his occupation that was being tasked by President Ford, Carter, and eventually Reagan into doing. Agency. Conker joins in between jobs to make a stable income as things took a turn for the worst. He's put as much money into aiding America and allowing U.S. civilians to live well in dire situations. Sadly, the GOP was still hurting after the Watergate incident. The Democratic Party is also having its own thorns to suffer with. Conker, registered as a Republican, not a Democrat, endorses Reagan to get the U.S. back on track. When all hope seemed lost, Flan and Spyro do what they can to ease the tensions. By the end of 1980, Reagan is elected in a landslide victory. It was there where Conker's occupation is put into good use. He works with him and Congress to expand on their legislations, such as cutting taxes, allowing the states to have their own way of governing as opposed to federal government. This can also show us the dynamics in the characters. While Spyro is seen as a brother to Flan and son to Reagan, Conker can be a friend to them. He's helped fend off global forces that threaten other countries in America, and eventually Metro's Furious. During his stay in U.S. Congress, Conker sees some form of corruption and notices that communism is a dangerous thing, which is apparent in Reagan's experience. He applies this notion and works to keep it at bay. Conker would be arguably the most patriotic U.S. civilian in this continuity, and would work towards being the most effective ally. Now let's look at his agency occupation. As mentioned previously, Conker works as an agent as his side job while studying in the university. He'll occasionally work alongside Flan in a few missions, such as obtaining the Godzilla embryo before Nasty and Metallica could, or spying on the Soviet Union for suspicious activity, one of which is being worked on as the first entry with Spyro being the protagonist in 1983. As for his full name being Connor Red Squirrel, he uses the majority of his first name, but replaces the N with the K at the end of his middle name, which explains why he's occasionally called Connor by both Reagan and other candidates in Congress. This would likely be the biggest arc for Conker, and most controversial. Conker becoming the president is an idea I wanted to tackle, and only change in US history for this timeline as opposed to George Bush in our timeline. But there's some things to keep in mind before I give my idea for Conker's presidency. 1. Conker needs to be 35 years or older to run. Conker in this continuity was born in 1949 in America, in which at some point Conker turns 35 in March 5th, 1984, and at 1988 he turned 39. 2 and 3. He must have been a U.S. resident for at least 14 years. As previously stated, born in 1949 in the U.S. as his parents immigrated from Metro's Furious, and became a U.S. citizen shortly after. While Conker's family might have been immigrants, they become U.S. civilians, and thus he already became one. He'd also need to have the knowledge in economics and legislation to be an effective president. Now, why am I bringing this up is because I have plans for 1 or 2 more arcs taking place after Spyro and his growing allies defeat the Soviet Union, Nasty Nork, Ripto, Shantae, Godzilla, and Metallica. Before going into Conker's presidency, we should examine George Bush's first. George Bush, not to be confused with his neocon son, has been known to have stagnated the legacy Reagan left off. He promised quite a lot, some of which is to not raise taxes and defend spending.
Read my lips.
Both of which he backpedaled on afterwards. It only took him a couple of years to get to that and left a bad taste in the conservative base's mouths. Even Ross Perot's campaign to run against him as an independent didn't make matters better. Thus, Bill Clinton's election in 1992 commenced. Bill, unlike Obama and Biden, is a moderate. He raised taxes on a few areas, but cuts them in others. Another aspect is a balanced economy, akin to Reagan's. Now, where Conker could come in is based on how the final arcs would turn out. Conker enters the 1988 Republican nomination convention. While George Bush would still get a large margin, as it was in the current timeline, Conker may still win in a slim margin against him. Democrat nominee could vary depending on which one, but it could be Dunkus Conker could still win in a landslide. The one thing Conker has that Bush Sr. doesn't is charisma, something Reagan had.
We're reminded of the many traditions of openness and democracy that have marked the history of this city. Amir missed me.
With a smart aleck personality, Conker could get his audience to follow him, maintaining much of the voters who supported Reagan throughout the 1980s and the Squirrel in the 1990s. However, what the final arc will entail is what determines Conker's presidency. Should Conker manage to get through the problems that would occur from 1989 to 1993, then he could get re-elected and aid his allies to finish off an incoming invasion to other worlds, including Earth. In his second term, Conker maintains the economy, wiped out the terrorists swiftly, and communism is almost non-existent. Not only is the Soviet Union dismantled, including Nazi Norg's army, but so is Misalika's militia. Now that they've been resolved, President Conker can get Spyro's crew prepared for a more powerful adversary, the Unicronic fleet. The final arc is something we'll cover later down the line, but the point is Conker is taking a tougher stance on his presidency and maintaining good relationships with other countries, avoiding starting a war, but finishing them as terrorist regimes are the ones to start. This can also show his struggle with him being burnt out. Conker has worked so much that it causes his allies concern for his health, despite at least being within his age of reason compared to most candidates at the time. There were a few who were just as fresh and can do the job well, Bill Clinton being one of them. Signs of an coming recession and a galactic war were there to Conker by the end of 1991, and he needs to pull off an impressive plan to pull himself together. He organizes groups to handle various issues while he focuses on the economy and foreign policies. If Conker succeeds in doing his task, the good ending suggests that he gets re-elected at a slightly smaller electoral victory, and still earning more votes in terms of popularity. If he fails, sort of, Bill Clinton wins at a margin smaller than our current timeline's 1992 election, though coming at a razor-thin race in terms of votes. It's the first step to developing this idea, though while some areas in this episode could be adjusted, the idea of Conker becoming the US president could still blossom in some shape or form. Born from his squirrel parents, Conker's family lived in southern Midgrandia Nui until an invasion by Zorg and Zaktan took place in their southern continent. This affected them greatly, and so they transported to America on Earth in 1947. About less than 2 years later, Conker was born, making him one of the first few interdimensional life forms whose origins outside of Earth is born in America, making him a legitimate American-born citizen. Conker spent his childhood like any other kid, but unlike them, he studied US history and has admired to working with Congress to fix issues. He played pretend with toy soldiers and even wanted to be a politician when he gets older. Fast forward to 1974, Conker managed to enter US Congress. While he missed his chance to being involved in the Vietnam War, his focus was on the Cold War at the Soviet Union. He worked with Republicans to keep their place despite Nixon's Watergate incident. Once Carter was elected, Conker and Reagan tried to maintain the right side of their political spectrum. During his place as a Congress squirrel, Conker met Spyro and Flan. They grew as allies. The three worked to ease tensions within the US Congress, hoping that they can one day infiltrate the Soviet Union and weaken their defenses. While Conker does not join both Spyro and Flan in their first adventure to Russia against Nazi Norg, he does join them in their second mission, this time against Godzilla and two perpetrators behind his attacks, Shantae and Ripto. In his political side, Conker spends time offering proposals in Congress to ease tensions and strengthening trust in American people. He also tends to make jokes, much like Ronald Reagan. Conker has an interesting history in gaming, arguably for the most controversial reasons. From his smart-aleck personality to shit-talking about the Pitchfork's parents or just making a tweet that got him popular. And got a few libs upset. Next time we'll take a look at Shantae. This one will be a special one, given her 20th anniversary on June 2nd, 2022. Thanks for watching, feel free to subscribe and check out my other content. Talk to you all next time. Over and out.
Me.